You're listening to the Sokan Community Podcast. Your favorite source for gaming, film, and internet debate starts now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Sokan Podcast. I'm your host, T, and with me are Jace and Leo.
And I'm Jace Drayson, who's here to talk about all the coolest things we can think of.
Hello, and I'm Leo, also here to bring you some podcast awesomeness.
It's going to be fun.
Speaking of the coolest things that we can think of, today we're going to be returning to our podcast's roots, and in doing so, we're going back to a galaxy far, far away. That means a whole lot of Star Wars talk this episode. Tell me, boys, has the Force been with you since last week?
Always.
So, we talked a little bit in the last podcast about how Jace and I have a long-standing disagreement about Star Wars. So
There's an inequity.
We've prepared a little skit for you. This is how the typical conversation about Star Wars goes. Action.
Hey, Leo, did you hear about the newest Star Wars thing? Looks like it's going to be really cool.
Man, Star Wars is dead.
No, not this thing, Leo. This particular thing I'm super excited and stoked about.
Ugh.
And scene.
And scene.
The Force has been with me always.
Well, okay, so it's not all bad. I mean, in a lot of the research, I found some really cool stuff and have experienced some really cool stuff. I'm stoked to talk about this today.
Yeah, I'm a Star Wars fan from way, way back. My entrance into the Sokan community, along with many, many others, was certainly the Star Wars Guild, and I was a Knight of Sokan. So this really is a wonderful return to the roots of what at least brought me into Sokan.
Today we're going to be covering the Baby Yoda, the Mandalorian, Jedi Fallen Order, and Kathleen Kennedy's position at Lucasfilm. Baby Yoda and his T-visored father figure have taken the internet by storm, and for many who have lost faith in the Star Wars franchise, since relit the flames of fandom. With the thriving Mandalorian RP guild on our roster, a lot of us in Sokan have put real research into figuring out Mandalorian culture. Ever since Disney's canon began, Mandalorians have been heavily undervalued. Until now. Do you think that this show is going to give the Mandalorians more lore coverage like the Jedi and Sith have?
But let's be frank, it really already has in huge, big, ginormous ways. Mandalorian lore is hugely based in legends in a lot of ways. Now it has been fleshed out to a certain degree in, say, Rebels, to a little more, maybe in Clone Wars a little bit, but the whole, this is the way, like, that is some foundational lore that we have already received just from the first, 4 or 5 episodes of The Mandalorian. So in a very big way, it has already given us a huge foundation for what it means to be a Mandalorian. The one episode, I don't know how deep in spoilers we're going, but the several episodes actually have given us little bits and pieces of Mandalorian lore and pointed back to some Legends lore, which is really kind of cool. But the whole thing of the Beskar armor and them sticking together when they're in kind of exile, like there's some really foundational Mando stuff here. And let me just, as an aside, say I have noticed that our Mando guild, the voice channel, has just kind of blown up in the past few weeks. So I'm thinking it's generating some excitement across the community, which is a fantastic thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the Mandalorians are one of those elements of Star Wars lore that has always been kind of a fan favorite. Ever since Boba Fett graced people's screens, people were curious and what in the world is this? And as the audience has gotten a taste of it, I think it's really cool to watch how even writers and creators don't always anticipate what's going to be a fan favorite. And this is one of those elements of Star Wars production that I think really is a nod to what the fans find interesting and what the fans really want more of. And I love that fans are finally getting it. the lore behind the Mandalorians, seeing it fleshed out on the screen is fantastic, and I'm really excited to see more. The fact that it's also helping garner interest in our little super nerd culture, in RP guilds in video games, is just such a huge boon to us. I'm really excited to see how things progress.
Leading off of what you said earlier, Jace, with incorporating Legends lore, let's take a brief aside. The Mandalorian, as well as Lucasfilm's other television series, such as The Clone Wars and Rebels, have been the biggest mediums of incorporating Legends lore into the new Disney canon. Is there anything else from Legends you guys are hoping to see made canon soon?
So there's a lot of really cool stuff in Legends lore. And there are a lot of, I think, really iconic characters that people are really excited to see play a part. Frankly, while those cool characters are awesome, and I'm totally for seeing them be included, what I really liked in some of the extended stories has been the extra galactic challenges or extra galactic enemies that faced our heroes and even our villains. I was doing a lot of reading, and I happened to pick up some stuff about the Yuuzhan Vong. I think I'm pronouncing that right. But they're a really fascinating creature that or race that came into the galaxy from another place, killed trillions of people. I mean, just horribly powerful and threatening creatures that really put a lot of the challenges, and they even made the threat of the Empire seem weak and small by comparison. And I think that would be really, really cool to explore in the future.
Funny thing about the Yuuzhan Vong is that a lot of Star Wars fans, Star Wars purists, really hated them. They hated the introduction of that into the culture of Star Wars. Now, this was pre-Disney. This was all expanded universe time, and many maybe previous listeners to the podcast know that I was an avid reader of the extended universe books. I mean, there probably isn't one I haven't missed. I read even the really crappy ones. I actually really did enjoy the Yuuzhan Vong storyline. It spanned several books and several series, several trilogies of books, because it added real stakes to the universe that were a lot bigger than just the in-universe stuff, which felt at that time when you were reading it, it made the other big challenges seem really small, because the Yuuzhan Vong were so pervasive and just viral.
Totally.
So it really was a great story to read for me at the time. Plus, some of the characters that we loved died in those books. That was during that time. Chewbacca died. Ben Skywalker. No. My bad. Anakin Solo. The new movies and the old. Anakin Solo, who was a character that doesn't exist in the canon now, but who was an original extended universe Legends character, died in the Yuuzhan Vong invasion. So there were a lot of just really impactful things that happened to me as a reader and a fan of Star Wars during that period. I absolutely loved it. The sad thing to me about as a fan of the extended universe is that with the advent of the new movies, a lot of the things that were the extended universe cannot happen. A lot of the legends that were created cannot happen because they have been wiped from the map by what has transpired in universe. I hope that they can glean some of the cool stuff and put it in universe. They have done that with, say, Grand Admiral Thrawn, who is nothing like, or exists completely out of time from his original iteration as he's been introduced into actual canon. I'm glad they used him. Awesome character, but he doesn't exactly fit how he originally was. I would love it if they would do that with some of the other characters. Kip Duran, as a reader of the Legends, was one of my absolute favorite characters. He was basically a dark side tempted fallen Jedi, super powerful. He was redeemed by Luke Skywalker and brought into the Jedi Praxium after the Heir to the Empire series. Really, really cool character. I would love it if they pulled him in. Cam Solusar was another one, and then everybody's favorite Kyle Katarn. It'd be great if some of those characters could maybe be reshaped or recreated and fit into the new canon. I would personally love it.
Mara Jade.
Mara Jade, but here's the deal with Mara Jade. This is what I'm talking about things that can't work. They now can no longer make Mara Jade a thing because her connection to the whole universe was Luke Skywalker. We already know Luke's story now. They have given us his middle and end, and Mara was not a part of it. Now, I suppose they could try to fill in the blanks a little bit. I would actually love it if they would do maybe a Luke Skywalker middle of his life movie, and they could cast, what's the guy who's Winter Soldier? What's that guy's name? I can't think of it. He looks kind of like Luke Skywalker. He could play it. But I guess they could squeeze it in. But Sebastian Stan, that's who it is. It'd be great if they did a Luke Skywalker movie with Sebastian Stan and they squeezed in Mara Jade somehow. But Mara Jade Skywalker now can't really be a thing because we know how that story ends with Luke, and she's not there unless they kind of squeeze it in. She is one of my favorites too, and it is sad that we most likely will not have her.
I have a great idea for what could be done to fill in the gaps from Luke Skywalker's life. I think maybe episode 7 could cover that.
Alright, let's get back to the Mandalorians after that aside. And talk about the most iconic Star Wars character from the new canon of this decade, the Child. Or as he's better known, Baby Yoda. Do you think this character will actually be related to one of the 2 creatures of his species we've seen so far, or perhaps a clone? Or do you have alternate theories?
So my favorite theory is the meme that I've seen that has the Jedi Council talking and asking Yoda what he got up to, and then the thought bubble of Yoda coming up with the gremlin with the purple wig and the pink boa, and Yoda closing his eyes and saying something to the effect of, mistakes I have made.
Good lord. So I don't know. There are perhaps things that it could do. There's a big part of me that hopes that they just keep Baby Yoda or the Child completely separate from Yoda. There's a really big part of me that does. There's kind of a sanctity to Yoda. We know he shows up as a Force ghost later on in the saga. At the time of Mandalorian, Yoda is already dead. So I really want them to kind of leave Yoda alone and not tie the Child to him. However, we know that the Emperor is coming back in episode 9. However they bring the Emperor back or extended his life or resurrected him, they potentially could say some witch howl that the Child is somehow in that same vein. Who knows how they'll bring him back. I don't have a theory about it personally, but my hope is they just keep that completely separate from Yoda. Just let him be of the same species. Certainly I would love to learn more about Yoda's species. It's always been a huge fat mystery for some reason. George Lucas really wanted Yoda's species to remain mysterious. I would like to keep some of that allure perhaps, and then just give us little bits and pieces about why that species is as powerful in the Force as they seem to be, but really, I would prefer the Child not to be related to Yoda in any way.
See, I kind of like the idea of the Child being related to Yoda. I think if this actually is a child of Yoda, this, for lack of a better term, humanizes Yoda. And I know he's not a human, but it gives Yoda a little bit more depth and more dimensions as opposed to just, a Jedi Master, a Force user. Like there's more to him. And it could even be, I know that's a big no-no for Jedi, but actually no, not the physical aspect. That's fine. But the idea that Yoda potentially had somebody that he cared for, and I think having a kid, I don't know, I think that's a lot of depth to Yoda that would be really cool to explore. I also think The Mandalorian, if it's going to have some connective tissue to Star Wars, while being set in the universe is awesome, there does tend to be some cool connective tissue. Even Rogue One that was set aside from Force user and whatnot, it was still tied directly to the Death Star. I think that kind of connective tissue is it's important, even if for nothing more than nostalgia's sake. So I kind of dig that element.
I mean, that was probably the most disturbing part. Okay, so first off, huge fan of Baby Yoda. I want to order everything online that I can find about it. They really were short-sighted and did not have Baby Yoda toys ready for Christmas. Epic fail on the marketing department. Just
Wow, no kidding. That surprisses me.
yeah, huge,
Disney,
huge
Disney
error. They're
doesn't
not going to
make
come
those
out till May.
mistakes.
Right, huge fail. Anyway, that said, the fact that there's a Baby Yoda mean that Yodas do sex, and nobody really wants to see that.
I mean, you're not wrong.
Yodas shouldn't do it.
Well, but there are other elements, I think, to consider. I mean, Yoda's race is supposed to be very rare, potentially even going extinct, and there are other examples of Jedi who have had children for that reason, and possibly, Yoda could be among them. He could be doing it out of, a sense of necessity.
Moving on. Why do you think?
Sorry, T.
Why do you think Lucasfilm has finally chosen to show us more of Yoda's species?
Oh man.
Cell. That's my answer. I think that the fact that they needed a huge win necessitated a big risk. The big risk was the penultimate moment of episode 1 of Mandalorian sucked all of us in. The Mandalorian was kind of cool up to that moment, but that last moment where you saw that little baby Yoda, bruh, you had me at no, like that. Here's a funny story. So the day that the Mandalorian came out, I think it came out like at 6 a.m. that day. I got to work at 8, and I already had a message from Mullen, who's obviously the one of the community executive officers, and he says, "Please tell me you've watched the Mandalorian episode 1." He'd already watched that mess. It hadn't been out 2 hours. It was morning time, right? So, and I was like, didn't it just come out? He was like, "Sorry, I had an emotional moment at the end." That gets to us. That baby Yoda was a money shot. And ultimately, I think that the reason that they lifted the veil, allowed us to have some Yoda moments, was really to say, Star Wars is still win. Here's your gold. Come have a happy moment. This is your new show.
Yeah, I think the folks behind The Mandalorian understand what it is that Star Wars fans are asking for, and what Star Wars fans are looking for. And so even the whole concept of exploring Mandalorian lore and culture, that's already an indication that they are doing this as a fan service. The fact that they tossed in Baby Yoda, and I had the same kind of reaction when I saw it. It was even after I had seen all the memes and and I watched it and I was like, oh man, Baby Yoda. It was impactful for anybody who has had a connection to Star Wars in almost any way. And so this is clearly a demonstration that the folks who are responsible for The Mandalorian know what they're doing when it comes to serving the fans. And they want to do that, and they're being empowered to do that.
Yeah, just as another quote, I pulled up my Discord while you were talking. Mullen, one of the things he texted me during that time, Jace, ... prepare yourself, #tears. So he's all in on it. Important to note, Jon Favreau, who is pretty instrumental in birthing the MCU, is obviously a big impact producer, director, creator for The Mandalorian. These people know how to please the fans. And I think one of the things that might be missing from some of the other Star Wars material is this fan. It's not just fan service, it's a fan honoring. It makes you feel like the building blocks of the fantasy life of my childhood have resounding, lasting effects into my adulthood. And they know how to touch those notes to pull you into that nostalgia later on, and not in a way that feels just real, that feels kind of patronizing, but in a way that makes you feel like everything means something. He's really good at that, and I think that's what they are succeeding with in Mandalorian. There are, if you look at some of the YouTube videos about the Easter eggs in Mandalorian, it ain't no joke. It is lovingly placed into the universe that we all grew up with. And even like I saw a little blurb. What in A New Hope when they are getting smashed in the trash compactor, and they have that metal bar that they're trying to brace it to keep. If you look I think it was on Navarro, there's one of those exact bars standing up in one of the alleyways. Like they literally created that piece of our nostalgia, a piece of our childhood, to just be a set piece. That's a lovingly created set dressing.
Yep. And I think that speaks to not only the intentions of the creators of the show, but it speaks to their caliber. I mean, it's so well done, and it's so nuanced and detail oriented and focused on the things that matter to the folks who are really invested in the Star Wars mythos, that these are folks that need to be lauded for their efforts.
Speaking of things that have been implemented that are new and things that call back to older times, this show has introduced the concept of Mandalorian signets, which seem to be a beast or enemy that they've killed in order to earn their place as a member of their clan. What do you guys think your signet would be if you were a Mandalorian?
Man,
A Jalisco changa.
What?
A Jalisco changa. It's a chimichanga at a local restaurant. It's the biggest thing you can possibly eat there, and it's covered in cheese dip. And I have conquered that mother effer.
So, I was trying to think of something witty to say here as well. And so I think my signet would be perhaps my youth and optimism. Get it? Because I'm a cynical old man now.
Oh, thanks. Now we're all depressed.
Womp womp.
If I was being genuine, I don't know what my signet would be. Probably a Chihuahua. I recently lost to Chihuahua. Hallelujah, little piece of Biddles. We love her. I love dogs, and I rescue them. So I feel like my signet wouldn't be as much about destroying them, but the salvation of the species of stray animals.
Way to make it real, Jace.
Sorry, everybody has feelings.
I don't.
Mandalorian clan signet's just a tax return form. The Mandalorian is just over halfway through with a set of 8 episodes for the first season of the series. We can't wait to see more of our helmet-wearing anti-hero gunslinging through the galaxy on his quest to find a decent daycare. If you're interested in Mandalorian roleplay and SWOTOR, head on over to sokangaming.com/Mando.
Pedro Pascal for the win.
Back on November 15th, Respawn and EA released Jedi Fallen Order to the public and wowed gamers everywhere with a gripping, action-packed Star Wars RPG with no multiplayer and so far, no loot boxes. Do you guys think this is EA's big turnaround after the Battlefront 2 debacle?
That's a big statement. I don't know if it's EA's big turnaround. I kind of alluded, I think, in episode 1 about how I think it is certainly a step in the right direction, especially for EA managing Star Wars properties. But I have to give them very high marks in Fallen Order. So, not just in terms of not making it an EA money grab type game, because they have a reputation for doing that, but also, or primarily, just for making a fantastic single-player Star Wars experience. So, yes, absolutely, they have won big marks for me personally. I did not pre-order the game because I've promised myself never to pre-order another EA game, but this has moved me back into the camp of, hey, these guys can sometimes do good stuff.
So, I get to reprise my role as resident cynic yet again. So, the game is not bad. However, it's not great. I mean, it's an okay game. I think what we're finding is Star Wars fans are so accustomed to terrible games that when an okay one comes out that is set in the Star Wars landscape, people flock to it, and people say this is an example of what we want. However, comparing it to, let's say, The Witcher 3, a similar game released 4 years ago, it has so much more to it than this one does that it's kind of a sad state of things, where a game that is, and granted my PC purist comes out in me here, but it's clearly a console game that's been ported to PC. It's meant for a controller. Trying to play it with a keyboard and mouse, like the PC Master Race does, makes for a clunky and late to respond experience. The maps are linear. You just have to follow the path given to you. There's no strategy before a fight. You just run in and fight. There's no customization of your character. You follow the skills that you can put points in. And I found myself out of potential ability points with ability points to spend that I didn't have anything to spend them on because I was maxed out wherever I was. It's like playing Tomb Raider with a lightsaber. And it's, again, not a bad experience. It's just not a great game. It's okay.
So I feel like we played totally different games. I'm not even sure that you're really talking about the exact same game that I'm talking about. Dang, where to start here? So first of all, you really can't compare Witcher, which personally I did not care for.
How dare you?
To this game. They're not the same genre. This is much more of an action game with light RPG elements than it is an RPG game, whereas The Witcher is much more role-playing game oriented. So they're not the same genre. They're different game experiences. I would still prefer this Fallen Order over Witcher just because the Witcher did not appeal to me necessarily. But I think that another thing that's very difficult to wrap my head around is the fact, like, just because something doesn't play as cleanly on a keyboard and a mouse doesn't mean it's not high quality. The fact of the matter is a keyboard and a mouse were not made to play games. It's made to do office work. It's made to process words. It's made to, do spreadsheets. So the fact that those tools don't play a game the best that they possibly can is natural. That's the way it's supposed to be. It should be. Controllers were developed play a game. I personally don't use a controller. I use a gamepad and a game mouse, and I have a wonderful experience when I do that. There's a little bit of customization I have to do on the front end, but that's with any game I play because I do some key mapping just to make it easy for myself and less clunky across the board. Had I played with a controller, though, the controller is pre-optimized to actually play the game. It's not like I'm having to type my game, because the typewriter is not intended to be a controller for games. It's intended to word process. So I think saying that typing your game is clunky is like, yeah, duh, don't type your game.
Okay. First of all, I don't have a typewriter, you old man. Okay, just to get that out of the way. But no, a keyboard and mouse setup, it does allow for quite a bit more precision in most games, particularly those games that are not designed for a controller. I think unfortunately what you have is when games are designed with a controller in mind, they're designed in a particular way with usually clunky camera angles and really just more of a guided game. So I found myself in probably half a dozen instances throughout playing it. I haven't finished the game, so there could be cooler things. Now the game is not without its high points, and I'm happy to express them. But you're right, The Witcher, particularly The Witcher 3, my favorite of the series, and Jedi Fallen Order are different games. However, their elements are very, very similar. They're a third-person, and I do think The Witcher is a very combat-centric game. It does have more RPG elements, but it's very narrative-driven. Both games are. They have interesting characters. There's a cool story. There really are a lot of similarities between those games. My point of bringing it up was to say that a game like The Witcher 3, released 4 years ago, had so much more depth to it in terms of what you could do with that character and the way that the game was played, versus this rather simple hack and slash. Now, that's not to say Jedi Fallen Order is just hack and slash. There is more to it than that. But the two games have so many elements that, or so many similar elements. I think they deserve to be compared. And I think the reason that Jedi Fallen Order is as simple as it is because it wasn't designed for PC. PCs can go into more depth with these games. But when you're talking about console development, they're just not capable of it. So the PC games have to lag behind. And this, I think, is a perfect example of that. The elements of the game does well. It has interesting characters. I mean, BD1, is that the droid? BD1?
That is the droid.
Is fantastic. Probably one of my favorite droids in the Star Wars franchise. It is adorable. The interesting character dynamics that I won't spoil, but that you get to experience as the player really are interesting. The story is a fun one. There are some really cool elements to it that make this a plus in my book. It is a game worth playing, but there are some shortcomings to it, and I think, unfortunately, people are fawning over it just because they've been given such hot garbage for Star Wars games for so long.
My producer's in my ear telling me to move on, but I feel like I must say one more thing. The game plays to me very much like the Batman Arkham series. There is a timing and dance to the combat. You have to know when to parry, when is the appropriate time to use this ability, when is not the right time to use it. There is an intricacy to it that actually I found very, very deep and fulfilling. But now we can move on.
Last word, now we can move.
Are you guys good?
Yes, I feel fulfilled.
Yeah.
As an RPer, I will tell you that I will type my video games if I want to. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But talking about story, the story of Fallen Order takes place after the fall of the Jedi and the rise of the Empire. We haven't seen a canon story about a Jedi in this time period since Rebels, and before that, not since the original trilogy. How do you feel about returning to a Jedi story like this?
Personally, I would not mind returning to a story like this over and over and over again. How many Jedi existed at the moment that Order 66 was implemented? Who knows? It would not hurt me at all to see many, many, many of the stories of those Jedi that are turned on by their clone troopers and see what happened. Even the ones that end up losing their lives, it's a very interesting time. This is the Purge is a period to me that I think it can easily be mined for fantastic stories of Jedi and fallen Jedi and gray Jedi who have, obviously the Order is over, and what's happening with them? Where did they go? Where did they hide? How did they cope? Cal Kestis' story is just but one, and it would not hurt my feelings at all to see many, many more of them. In fact, I have to say, I really enjoyed the story of Rebels. Ezra's story, Kanan Jarrus' story, also known as Caleb Dume. Like those are great stories to know. Those people that lived under that oppression. There's something that resonates within people to hear the tales of people who are oppressed and how they survived or didn't survive, or how their legacy existed past them. So I felt really great about it.
Yes. As much as I hate to agree with Jace, I do. I think I had spoken in the last episode about how much I like stories about just the normal person in a crazy world like this and how they survive. Cal comes across even as a normal person. Cal is still having to figure out how to survive, and Cal is getting back in touch with his connection to the Force throughout the game, and you get to experience that with him, and that is a really cool story. I'm also a super fan of apocalyptic stories. I cannot get enough, and I know that it's played out, but I cannot get enough of zombie apocalypse kinds of stories. They're candy for me. I will eat them up regardless of how fat they make me. And the reason I like them is because I like to see exactly what this story showed, which is desperate people trying to figure out how to survive and trying to figure out how to make the most of a really terrible situation, particularly when all methods of normal support and normal infrastructure are gone. And that's what this did. It was so awesome to experience that with these characters. That is the kind of flying by the seat of your pants, sitting on the edge of your chair, and barely figuring out how you're going to get through the next day kind of story that really keeps me coming back. And I agree. There's so much potential for these kinds of stories. The Purge is easily one of the most interesting and tragic elements of the Star Wars universe that really should have more stories about it.
If you'd like more of a poncho-wearing hero to balance out your Beskar, Jedi Fallen Order is available now on Xbox, PlayStation 4, and PC.
Get a controller.
PC Master Race.
A little while ago, Rolling Stone interviewed the president of Lucasfilms, Kathleen Kennedy, about ending the Skywalker saga of Star Wars and where the franchise would go next. This interview has lived in infamy among Star Wars fans ever since, due to the quote, "There's no source material. We don't have comic books. We don't have 800-page novels." While she evidently meant that the story of the new trilogy has been almost entirely original, fans are up in arms about the complete dismissal of years and years of Legends lore. Is the anger from the fan base warranted, do you think?
So, yes. 1,000 times yes. I get where she was coming from with that answer, but I think fans have been frustrated at way more than that quote. But I think that quote kind of summed up where a lot of fans feel, or it summed up what a lot of fans feel about Kathleen Kennedy's approach to their baby, which is Star Wars. It feels like she doesn't love it. It feels like she just doesn't care. The opposite of what the creators of The Mandalorian have done. So I think fans reacting to that quote, they're really reacting to the greater saga of Kathleen Kennedy and how this quote feels to them.
So anger is a feeling, and everyone has a right to their feelings. So warranted is a tough word when you're talking about a feeling. I think that we must recognize the feelings of the fans and how they are reacting to that comment and others, but at the same time, as a huge fan of the extended universe, as I have previously just announced to everyone, I do understand what she was saying. A lot of the extended universe could not be filmed because the cast was too old. They had to find a story that fit narratively as well as within the real world. So the choice was one of two. Choice one, we recognize lore, the extended universe, as canon, and then we progress from there. Choice two, we wipe the slate clean and decide what's happening with these characters now. They made a choice, and I can respect the choice even as a fan of very much of the extended universe. I have a hard time saying people shouldn't be mad, because you can't tell someone they can't be mad. Feelings just happen. We don't know where they come from. They just occur. But I certainly understand, as a business person who had just bought what it was, a $4 billion property, that a choice had to be made. And as the kind of head, the tip of the spear for Lucasfilms, she had to make a call. And really, it was left or right, and she called right, when evidently much of the fan base wished she had gone left, perhaps.
No, she called wrong.
We discussed earlier how since the Disney acquisition, they have canonized Darth Bane, Admiral Thrawn, and a lot of Mandalorian culture that was previously empty. However, Legends also, as we've noted, has a lot of stories that are a little out there. Do you think Disney should be taking more from Legends to canonize it?
I think there's plenty to glean from. I think Grand Admiral Thrawn is a fantastic example of how to do it right. In the original creation, I think Timothy Zahn was the author of the Heir to the Empire series. It was a fantastic series to read, and it introduced Thrawn. In that particular iteration, however, it occurred after Return of the Jedi, and our famous heroes Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, Leia Organa Solo faced off against this Grand Admiral. And he was a member of the Imperial Remnant, I believe as they called it, and it was a great story. But his character, one of the things that kind of was notable about him was he would take the art of a culture, he would examine their art, and it would indicate to him their weakness or the way that they thought, so that as a strategic genius, he would know how then to defeat them. So what they did was they took Grand Admiral Thrawn, that art critic, strategist, and moved him back in time to between episodes 3 and 4. So he's now prior to A New Hope, and they used him as an antagonist for the Rebels series, but they kept the kernel of the character pure. They still used those things about him that were really, really cool. The fact that he was Chiss, the fact that he was the collector of art, the fact that he was a strategic genius. I think that's probably the way to do Legends lore justice. There is plenty of cool stuff like that all throughout the extended universe that they could glean from and pull into Star Wars, whether it's new movies or the new cartoon series, whatever they want to do. There's plenty of cool stuff that they genuinely could glean from and recreate in a way that still works within the current canon or the current continuity.
Yeah, I think the difference between what we're seeing with the sequel trilogy and what we saw in the extended universe is what seems to be a love of the franchise. Those who came up with those, frankly, amazing stories from the extended universe really did the universe justice. What we have seen with the sequel trilogy is an abandonment of previous Star Wars canon. We've seen a contradiction of established Star Wars lore. We've just seen weird stuff that has seemed to indicate that the creators of the material haven't been paying attention or don't have the same kind of love and appreciation that previous writers and previous authors of these works have had. Where I think they would go right in this is to take inspiration from those stories. What I think would be the wrong thing to do is to take characters like Thrawn and throw them into the wrong time period, to put them in wrong circumstances. It's what they've done with Luke Skywalker. Where I think they could have rectified this change in Skywalker is to justify it somehow. They need to be able to explain how in the world these crazy distinctions or differences have happened. We have just wound up in a world where everything is completely irrelevant. At least everything from the past is completely irrelevant. I would hate to see some of those really cool and iconic characters also be put in those similar positions where the awesome stories that they've had have been made irrelevant by whatever it is that becomes canon since Disney decanonized all of that other cool stuff. I think it really should just come down to inspiration. I think the stories that exist there should be used as fodder, or at least as the kind of structure to make good stories, but new characters need to be created with it, because I think in a lot of ways it dishonors those characters to simply throw them into situations that are in a lot of ways unearned, or situations that are unwarranted.
There a couple things. First of all, it's a little unfair to say that the new creators of the sequel trilogy are not fans. J.J. Abrams is a huge Star Wars nerd, huge Star Wars fan, and he did things with The Force Awakens that really did honor the original source material. For instance, using more practical effects and trying to make it look like A New Hope and those movies. So there really is some honoring that went on in that way. I will say too, though, that while you can pull from the great or good extended universe for good characters like Thrawn, there is plenty of that crap that ought to be just cast to the side and flushed down the toilet. Splinter in the Mind's Eye is an example. It was a novel that came out very, very, very early on in the life of Star Wars, where things like a romantic relationship between Luke Skywalker and Leia Organa were explored. Obviously, the depths of their relationship had not been revealed in film. That kind of stuff should be cast aside. There were stories where, say, Han Solo and Chewbacca made an ill-fated jump to planet Earth, and Chewbacca is deemed to be Bigfoot on planet Earth. He's the progenitor of the Bigfoot mythos here on planet Earth. Like, there's some really crap extended universe that has to be recognized for what it is. I think that the smart producers pick what is good and glean that into the continuity, and then realize what is just really, really bad, and either discount it, ignore it, or push it out.
For sure. And I don't doubt JJ's cred as a fan of Star Wars. I'm not sure that he was the right person for it. I think Mr. Mystery Box, I think Mr. Lens Flare, he's got a talent for a certain kind of movie, and he's got a talent for setting things up that later are never answered or don't ever come to fruition or meet rather unsatisfying ends. And I think we got the Abrams treatment with 7 to 8. Who's at fault? I I think we can point fingers at all of that stuff. I think that the decisions that were made were not the best ones. I think they would have been in a much better place had they adapted some of the extended universe stuff instead of remaking Star Wars.
And I will be the first to admit that in a lot of ways, The Force Awakens is a beat for beat or a spiritual remake of A New Hope. But
Yeah.
honestly, I loved that. And I think that was JJ's way of saying, I love you, Star Wars. And I was cool with it. The Force Awakens, I thought, was a BA movie. I was on board for what was happening. And you're right, he did set up a lot of things that ultimately I feel like Rian Johnson did not feel like fulfilling. It would have been fantastic to have JJ helm the trilogy rather than just 1 and 3 of that trilogy. But I honestly, I was on board for where he was going. He does see science fiction, science side a little differently than I do. He does want to make story first rather than realism first, and sometimes as a fan that frustrates me. But I love JJ, and I love what he did with The Force Awakens. So I don't know. I'm on board for what he was trying to do, and I'm really excited for what he's going to do with Episode 9. I think that The Rise of Skywalker could perhaps be the end of that love letter that he started in The Force Awakens.
Maybe. I'm skeptical. I haven't seen. So I think the complete abandonment of what had been accomplished and the state of the universe after Episode 6, the fact that it was completely dissolved and we were back where we started, that needed to be addressed. There had to be an explanation for it, a flashback, in anything. And the fact that none of the predicaments that any of the characters were in felt earned to me, everything that had been accomplished just felt dissolved. And I think that's where some of my heartburn for the JJ's interpretation of, Episode 7, I think that's where that comes from, is there was no effort to try and justify the position. We're just there. We're back at where Episode 4 started for no real good reason.
Some rumors have circulated about Jon Favreau or Kevin Feige taking over Lucasfilms in the future. Do you think Kathleen Kennedy ought to be replaced?
Yes.
Okay, so this is hard for me. This is hard for me because I actually am not a Kathleen Kennedy hater at all. E.T. when I was a child, was my absolute very favorite movie. Very foundational for me as a child. I think that she has her hands and her production credits on a lot of really fantastic stuff. Some of the best-selling movies of all time have Kathleen Kennedy's fingerprint on them. So she's obviously a very talented producer. So I'm not going to bash her. However, anytime you bring up Kevin Feige's name, little Jace has a moment of attention, because I'm a huge fan of the MCU and the way that the connective tissue and continuity is really honored and loved through that whole storytelling experience. I would really love it if some of that, if some of that, if some of that Kevin Feige energy could be harnessed and then injected into the Star Wars universe. That style of continuity that really is about fun and heart really does have a place in the Star Wars universe for me. So I don't necessarily want her to be replaced. I think Kathleen Kennedy is a fantastic producer, has been for many decades. But Kevin Feige, I really don't know that I have much more respect for anyone else in Hollywood right now.
So I think Kathleen Kennedy has a lot of cred working with other really good producers. She worked with Spielberg and has really made a name for herself by working alongside giants. I have been less than impressed with what she's done with Lucasfilms. There is a sordid history about the way she has managed her role. Everything from being put in her position to honor George Lucas's vision and then not, to being the one responsible for not having an overarching theme for a trilogy of movies and putting different directors in place for each movie. The staggering incompetence that it takes to make a decision like that, to me, is mind-blowing.
Well, I don't know that it was incompetence. I don't think that's fair to say. I think even if you read the Rolling Stone article, as we referenced at the beginning, she makes reference to the fact that, look, in hindsight, JJ probably wishes he could have helmed the entire trilogy. JJ opted not to do that. I don't know that that was her choice. Sometimes business happens and you got to make the best of it.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, George Lucas didn't direct the original trilogy. Like, multiple directors doesn't necessarily mean a shot in the head.
Right. But there needs to be a single story, and she opted not to do that. And granted, George Lucas is a great visionary, and he's brilliant at world building. He happens to not be a good writer, and he happens to not be a good director. So I don't disagree with the decisions to not include him at those levels for the sequel trilogy. I do think even some of the ideas I've heard he presented, I don't think it was the wrong call to not go with all of them. I don't want to get into all that. However, the decisions she has made, yes, in hindsight, they were terrible, but I mean, I would imagine in foresight, they were probably terrible too. I get business needs to happen, and I get there are really large price tags for these projects, but not having a singular concept for a project like this is baffling. And I also think there's a whole host of other issues that have occurred in these series. There seem to be other agendas in place rather than just making a good story. There seems to be just a really fundamental disagreement between what actually makes a good story versus what we're getting. And Kathleen Kennedy is at the helm of all of it.
I think what cannot be discounted is the fact that she is still at the helm of some of the largest movies in the history of planet Earth. I mean, while we can certainly nitpick the fact that the tales may not have unfolded as we had wished, the fact of the matter is she's still producing movies that are wildly successful.
Yeah,
I mean, I get what you're saying in terms of the narrative feeling less than cohesive between the Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. I will be the first to admit that there does seem to be a disconnect. My finger point is much more towards Rian Johnson. I have much more blame towards him. The director of the film has a lot more say than the producer. The producer and the studio certainly have the reins on a macro scale, but when it comes to actually producing the art, you've got to give the director the power to do what they want to do. And ultimately, the failures of that power fall with the director, to me. I don't necessarily think that Kathleen Kennedy was the fail. She was signing the checks and kind of had this really far overarching, ultimately high-level executive view of the story. Rian Johnson is the one who wanted to shake up the aquarium, and he did.
He wanted to subvert our expectations.
Right, that was his
Even if
primary
those were
goal.
to watch a good movie.
Yes, she allowed him to do that, certainly, and I won't argue that point, but I think that doesn't detract from the fact that she still makes very successful movies, and has since I was a small child.
For sure, but she's responsible for putting Rian Johnson in this. So, I get what you're saying. I am not a fan of Rian Johnson's take either, but she's the one who put him there, and I think better decisions could have been made by a more mindful producer.
Like, I think that I just kind of wish JJ would have stayed the director of all the movies.
I think we'd have a more cohesive story that way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, while many fans are unhappy with the quote, and with Kathleen Kennedy, let's not forget that Disney has been making a lot of money from the Star Wars films despite their critique, and that likely means Kennedy won't be going anywhere anytime soon.
Not soon enough.
Well, it is that time again, gents. Tea time. This week we have a question submitted by DeSantis from the Knights of Sokan. If you were put in charge of Lucasfilms and Disney gave you free reign over the Star Wars franchise, what would you do?
Fire Kathleen Kennedy. Immediately.
No, that's not what I would do. I would immediately greenlight. I don't know if it would be a Disney Plus series, now that that's an option, or a movie trilogy of young Yoda.
Why?
Why? I want to know. I want to know Yoda as a Padawan 800 and some odd years ago. And I want to know then Yoda as a Jedi Knight, and then Yoda as a Jedi Master as he progresses. I saw an image one time on the internet that showed a young Yoda, and it was just a really compelling image. I have to say, in the viewing of the prequel trilogy, one of the highlights of the entire experience was when Yoda fought Count Dooku, because up until that moment we had only seen sort of a cane-wielding, decrepit Yoda who could barely carry himself, and instantly he became this like furry fists of fury as he lightning lightsaber dueled Count Dooku. I would love to see more of that little fellow being just a straight up jank BA Jedi.
All right. I apologize for laughing because that was rather compelling, and I agree with you. That would be a really cool story. I just was going off the Baby Yoda meme, and I thought it was kind of funny. I would fire Kathleen Kennedy, although I would have her job, so clearly she'd be gone. I'd probably fire her into the sun because, you know,
Oh my god.
she deserves it. Then I'd bring in Jon Favreau and I'd bring in Dave Filoni to completely rewrite Episode 9, and I would, if I wasn't fired or executed in the process, I would just tell Disney, hey, you're going to have to give this some time. We're going to have to reshoot it. We're going to have to redo it. And I would rectify all of the nonsense that has occurred in Episodes 7 and 8.
Episode 7 was perfectly fine. I
How
guess
dare you?
This
How dare
isn't
you?
a debate
How dare
session.
you?
I should just allow you to have your tea time opinion.
No, I mean, we're going to disagree over 7. I don't think it was as bad as 8. 8 is, to me, the worst Star Wars thing outside of the Christmas special.
Ugh. Dear Lord.
You had to acknowledge it?
You know what's funny about the Christmas special, though? That is the first time ever that the Mandalorian known as Boba Fett was fleshed out in any way whatsoever. I believe he rode a dinosaur as a cartoon in that movie. Have you ever seen it?
Yes, I have seen it. I've also seen the weird Wookiee smile.
Yeah, it's a lot.
So, if it was my world, that's what I would do. Dave Filoni, Jon Favreau, make episode 9, make episode 7 and 8 not suck, and then let's have a good Star Wars conclusion.
You're put in charge of Lucasfilm sounds a lot more like altering the space-time continuum. You can't undo time.
Look, if Jean-Luc Picard can... No, that's not space-time.
He's
continuum.
coming. He's
That's
coming.
the
I
Prime
can't wait.
Directive. I have my terms wrong. If Superman can fly backwards around the orbit of the Earth a few times and mess with the space-time continuum, if I'm in charge of Lucasfilms, I can do this too.
Okay. That's a leap, but okay.
They're equally unlikely, is what he's saying.
Yes, they are equally unlikely.
Alright, if you'd like to submit a tea time question for the podcast, head on over to sokangaming.com/sokanmedia and find the submission bar on the right side of the page. Thank you for joining us today, everyone. For more, visit us at sokangaming.com/sokanmedia, follow our Twitter @sokangaming, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find future episodes of the podcast on Google Podcasts and iTunes. Until next time, I've been T.
I've been Jace Drayson the whole time.
I was and am and will continue to be Leo.
And we'll see you next week.
Stay classy, Sokan.
Thank you for listening to the Sokan Community Podcast. Craving more? Visit us on Twitter and YouTube @Sokan Gaming, as well as our website, www.sokangaming.com. Until next time, stay classy. Right, Jace?